All characters in the story are adults. My father passed away when I graduated from 8th grade. He was a professional boxer, and my mother and I were very worried about his passing all summer. Every time I came home from work, my mother was in the kitchen, crying. I did not go for a walk, and instead I occupied myself with reading books and exercising with dumbbells. My parents were very worried when my father passed away. They were concerned about my mother's well-being, and they were worried about me. They were worried about me because I was upset. I was upset when I heard my mother crying. I couldn't leave her alone. But with the beginning of the school year, everything began to return to normal. My mother and I shared the responsibilities of the house. We got used to a different life. The most unusual thing for me was that my mother refused to sleep in their bedroom. Our apartment was a 2, it was disconcerting to hear my mother sobbing, yet I felt compelled to stay by her side. With the commencement of the school year, our lives began to revert to normal. My mother and I shared responsibilities for maintaining the household and adjusting to our new circumstances. The most peculiar aspect was my mother's reluctance to sleep in their bedroom. Our apartment comprised a living room, a hall, and a bedroom. The hall resembled a fitness center, equipped with a small mat on the floor, various exercise equipment bolted to the walls, and a bicycle path in the far corner. These items had to be relocated. My mother sold her double bed from the bedroom and purchased a small sofa for the hall. Additionally, she requested that we move her dressing table from the bedroom. Initially, my mother and I considered moving me completely into their bedroom, but the horizontal bars firmly bolted to the walls prevented that. We decided to abandon this idea. In addition, a computer was installed in the hall, with a cable discreetly hidden nearby. My mother and I shared a storage room in my parents' bedroom. We had discussed the importance of keeping our belongings in place to avoid disturbing other tenants. However, when I returned home from school, I wanted to use the room, but my mother wasn't home yet. When I returned from training, my mother was already going to bed. We rarely crossed paths with her, but we spent more time together. On weekends, I would watch a movie, but weekends are typically brief. It has been 3 years since my mother and I began residing together. I did not complete 11th grade, and after the 9th grade, I attended college. During this period, my mother was employed as a vendor at the market. One evening, I did not engage in physical activity, and I performed exercises at home. My mother returned from work, changed her attire, and proceeded to the kitchen to prepare dinner. After completing the necessary exercises, I went to the shower. Upon exiting the shower, my mother was in the room. She stood in front of the mirror and observed herself. She was wearing a new set of underwear. "The soup is ready, let it rest for a while, and in 15 minutes, we'll proceed to dinner," she said, turning in different directions and looking at the new thing. I watched her more than once when she was standing in front of the mirror, trying on her outfits. "Do I need to congratulate you on the new thing?" I decided to talk to my mother. "I didn't buy it, but they gave it to me." Mom answered immediately, as if she was just waiting for me to pay attention to her. Without paying much attention to her words, I put on my headphones and stared at the computer. A few days later, I noticed that my mother was spending a lot of time in front of the mirror. I was a bit surprised that she was receiving undergarments so frequently. One day, while she was trying on her gifts, I observed that her behavior was different. She was speaking incoherently and swaying. I realized that she had been drinking alcohol. I was sitting on the couch, reading a magazine. At one point, I looked at my mother and asked, "How do you like it?" She was posing in front of me. "You have a man who gives you all this. Do I understand correctly?" I asked, looking at my mother's face. "You're right. It turns out I'm still." She was quite attractive, and I found her to be quite appealing. She was a decade younger than me, and I asked Hek to be my partner. He was 10 years my junior, but it didn't bother him. He was crazy about me. It was useless to ask my mother about her attitude toward the affair that had happened. She did not hide her delight as she was quite attractive and much younger than I am. I asked Hek to marry me, and he agreed, despite being 10 years my junior. It was pointless to ask my mother about her feelings on the matter, she was delighted to be courted by a younger man. I knew perfectly well that my mother could be happy with another person. After all, life goes on. The only thing I disliked was that Mom smelled like alcohol. I turned away from her to avoid continuing the conversation. I was aware that it was common for mothers to be courted by young men. I understood that my mother could potentially find happiness with another individual. However, I found the odor of alcohol on her breath unpleasant. I decided to end the conversation with her and turned away from her to face the wall, wishing her good night. One evening, I decided to earn money by unloading wagons. When I called my mother, I informed her that I would be home later than usual. When I approached the house, I noticed that the light was on in the kitchen. I assumed that my mother was waiting for me and had not yet gone to bed. I entered the apartment building and proceeded to the hallway. I detected a noise in the kitchen and, upon further investigation, discovered that dishes had fallen off the table. I immediately went to the kitchen and found a man I didn't know making love to my mother. I then understood that my mother had been waiting for me, and that I should not go to bed. I entered the kitchen and saw a man engaging in intimate relations with my mother. I immediately grabbed him by the collar and pushed him out of the apartment. I then lifted him by the shoulders and forcefully ejected him from the premises. After slamming the front door, I stood for a few minutes. I forcibly removed the man from the premises, pushing him out of the apartment and slamming the front door in his face. With my eyes closed, I could hear the man swearing on the landing. He did not re-enter the apartment. I removed my sneakers and returned to the kitchen. My mother was heavily intoxicated. I carried her into the room, placed her on the couch, and decided to clean up the kitchen the next day. With my eyes closed, I could hear the man I had previously encountered on the landing, voicing his discontent. He did not re-enter the apartment. I removed my sneakers and proceeded back into the kitchen. She appeared to be quite intoxicated. I escorted my mother into the room, positioned her on the couch, and indicated my intention to clean the kitchen the following day. Avoiding further interaction with my mother, I exited the room to unload the wagons. In the evening, my mother and I engaged in a rather uncouth dialogue. "Do you comprehend the gravity of your actions?" my mother inquired, employing profanity. "Who was the individual responsible?" I inquired, attempting to ascertain the identity of the person who had caused such a disturbance. "He is the proprietor of numerous retail establishments throughout the area," my mother responded. "I have no concern for him." I declined to engage in conversation with my mother, and instead proceeded to unload the wagons. That same evening, I engaged in a rather uncouth dialogue with my mother. "Do you understand what you've done?" my mother inquired, her tone laced with profanity. "Who was it?" she continued. "It was our master," I replied. "He operates numerous retail outlets in the area." "I don't care about him," I retorted. "Why did you decide that he loves me?" my mother inquired. "You didn't stop me from doing that to your loved ones," I replied. "I'm not doing that to you," my mother interjected. I covered my head with a blanket. 2 days after these events, I was walking through the square near our house when I was accosted by the same individual I had previously encountered. I was met with a raised voice in response to my inquiry regarding the motivation behind his actions. The individual, a friend of my father's since childhood, approached us. I had the impression that he had anticipated the confrontation. "You should have intervened before the incident occurred. I was confident that we could manage the situation effectively as a team." "Why did you decide that he loves me?" My mother did not intervene. "It is not advisable to behave in such a manner towards your loved ones," I replied, covering my face with a blanket. 2 days after the incident, I was walking through the square near our residence when I was approached by the same individual. "You were the one who pushed me out of my apartment. There were 2 other men standing behind you." "Hey," Puppy, we need to talk. He turned to me, displaying a sense of superiority. You can't do that either. 3 against 1. I heard a familiar voice from the right. I was forcibly removed from my residence, and I had a contusion under my eye. There were 2 other individuals standing in the background. He addressed me with an impudent smile, displaying a sense of superiority. You can't do that either. 3 against 1. I heard a familiar voice from the right. A friend of my father, whom I had known since childhood, approached us. You should have walked by, old man, before you were thrown. The mother's abuser continued in a confident voice. I knew perfectly well that Dad's friend appeared very timely. I had no doubt that together, we could handle the scumbags. A friend of my father's, with whom I had been acquainted since childhood, approached us. You should have walked by the old man before you were thrown. The mother's abuser continued in a confident voice. I knew perfectly well that Dad's friend appeared very timely. I had no doubt that together, we could handle the scumbags and their leader. I stepped up to meet them and hit them first again, hoping for a favorable outcome in our fight. Dad's friend asked me the reason for the fight. I told him everything as it is. Yes, indeed you have started a hard life. Well, don't worry. Let me know if there's anything we can help you with. He encouraged me. As I straightened his clothes, my mother worried me the most. The scene I saw in the kitchen recently kept coming back to me on the way home. I thought about how it was possible for her to fall in love with such a vile person. I wondered, does Mom really like all this? There was a surprise waiting. I returned to the apartment and entered the residence. Upon doing so, I encountered my mother in the hallway. I informed her that she had been drinking alcohol again, but I refrained from commenting further. Her strong scent of alcohol was evident, and it appeared that she was unable to remove her shoes. She fell asleep in a sprawled position on the floor. I first entered the room. I changed clothes and went into the hallway, where I squatted in front of my mother. It became apparent that I would not be able to rouse her, so I put her on the couch. I noticed that her skirt and blouse would be wrinkled if she were to lie on the couch. I changed into a different outfit, and then went out into the hallway and squatted in front of my mother. I realized that I would not be able to convince her to regain her composure. As I put her on the couch, I thought that the skirt and blouse that Mom was wearing would be wrinkled. Mom was lying on the couch, breathing softly, immersed in her drunken sleep. I decided to take advantage of this position, and we made love. When Mom's alarm clock rang in the morning, she couldn't immediately turn it off. Stretching out her hand to the ringing mechanism without looking at it, she turned it off and continued to lie down. I had to go to school that morning. I was surprised that Mom wasn't going to work when my alarm went off. I immediately threw off the blanket and went to the shower. When I came out of the bathroom, Mom was in the kitchen. After making sandwiches, Mom made coffee and I was invited to join my mother and father at the table. After a period of silence, breakfast was served. During this interaction, my mother did not look at me, but rather at a point on the wall. She did not look at me again that morning, and appeared to be preoccupied with thoughts of another subject. I attempted to explain that I had arrived after she had already fallen asleep. However, my mother did not pay attention to my explanations. She continued to stare at a point in front of her. My father then informed me that he had fired me the day before. Initially, he called his office and, upon arriving at the office, informed me to go to the accountant. I was able to calculate the amount, but I was surprised by the result. I didn't want to hurt you. Finally, feeling more confident, I said that it seemed to me that my mother would be upset about what I did yesterday when I put her to bed, but it turns out that Mom's head was. I realized that my mother was preoccupied with other matters, which explains my decision to overindulge in alcohol the previous night. I have no recollection of how I returned home or even reached my bed. It was as if a significant burden had been lifted. I was relieved to discover that my mother was unaware of the events that had transpired. After completing my coffee, I expressed my gratitude for breakfast and proceeded to my room to get dressed and prepare for school. It was then that I learned that the last class had been cancelled, and I was able to return home early. Upon arrival, I found my mother sitting on the couch. There was a large pile of her underwear on the floor in front of her. I thanked my host for breakfast and went into the room to get dressed and prepare for school. I learned that the last class had been cancelled, so I came home early. My mother was sitting on her couch. There was a large pile of her underwear on the floor in front of her, with her head leaning back on the sofa and her eyes closed. Tears were running down her cheek. "Hi, Mom. What happened? Are you sorry?" Apart from all this, I asked my mother, coming closer to her. I smelled alcohol again. She opened her eyes and reached out to me. She cried even harder. "I don't feel." With her head leaning back on the sofa, her eyes closed, and tears streaming down her cheek, she asked her mother, "What happened? Are you sorry?" Apart from all this, I asked my mother, coming closer to her. I smelled alcohol again. She opened her eyes and reached out to me. She cried even harder. "I don't feel sorry for myself at all. It's just that as soon as I destroyed all this, my friend called and said she could hire me." My mother replied with tears in her eyes. "Well, that's good," I rejoiced. "When I met your father, there was one case he asked me out on a date. I was too shy to go on a date in this old. I apologize for the personal nature of this message, but I'm reaching out because I'm in a difficult situation. I recently destroyed some personal belongings, and shortly thereafter, I received a call from a friend who offered me a job." My mother, who was present during this conversation, expressed her delight and asked me if I would be comfortable with her purchasing new undergarments for me. I explained that I was too embarrassed to go on a date in my current undergarments and requested a new set from a friend. Now, I find myself in a similar situation. I have an upcoming meeting with the new team, and I'm worried about wearing the same undergarments. My mother, who was also present during this conversation, looked at me with a smile through her tears. Without hesitation, I took a step towards my desk and retrieved the money I had saved by working part-time. I recently purchased a new set of underwear for my mother, and now I find myself in need of another. I will be visiting the new team tomorrow. My mother looked at me and smiled through her tears. Without hesitation, I took a step towards my desk, retrieved the money I had saved by working part-time, and left the apartment. I came up with the idea to personally purchase underwear for my mother so that she would not feel ashamed. An hour later, I was back in the apartment, handing my mother a package. By this time, Mom had already removed all the rags that were lying in the middle of the room and was standing near them, looking at her face in the mirror. Taking the package from my hands, Mom smiled and asked, "Did you really go?" I proceeded to the loading and unloading of time. I departed from the apartment with the intention of purchasing undergarments for my mother, ensuring her comfort and dignity. An hour later, I returned to the apartment and presented her with a package. By this time, Mom had already collected the refuse scattered on the floor and was standing near the mirror, examining her reflection. She took the contents of the bag and expressed her surprise, stating, "And you actually went out and bought me new undergarments." She proceeded to examine the contents of the bag, expressing her delight at the selection I had made. It appeared to me that I had selected the most aesthetically pleasing model from the options available at the store. I did not want to cause discomfort, but rather ensure her continued beauty and well-being. I began to speak with enthusiasm, expressing my desire for her to possess the most exquisite items. "And buy me new underwear," she said, her tone a mixture of surprise and anticipation. She proceeded to empty the contents of the bag and gasped in astonishment at the selection of underwear before her. She looked at me, then at the items, a smile spreading across her face. It appeared to me that I had selected the most appealing model from the array of options available in the store. "I don't want to know that you're uncomfortable. I want you to always look your best. May you have the most exquisite things," I began, my voice tinged with excitement. You are my most attentive and caring man. My mother interrupted, her words laden with understanding. The scent of alcohol wafting from her reminded me of a previous occasion. I attempted to continue the conversation, but I implored, please, don't ever drink again. Well, I've had quite a few drinks today. It's just that after yesterday, I had a headache. I took some for treatment. My mother began to justify herself, lowering her eyes. I'm talking in general. I'm concerned about you. You've had too much to drink. Mom, I love you. I love you too, Mom. You're drunk. You're a danger. You should not be driving. Mom, I love you. I'm not driving. I'm fine. You're not driving. You're a danger. You should not be driving. Mom, I love you. I'm not driving. I'm fine. You're not driving. You're a danger. You should not be driving. Mom, I love you. I'm not driving. I'm fine. You're not driving. You're a danger. You should not be driving. Mom, I love you. I'm not driving. I'm fine. You're not driving. You're a danger. You should not be driving. Mom, I love you. I'm not driving. I'm fine. You're not driving. You're a danger. You should not be driving. Mom, I love you. I'm not driving. I'm fine. You're not driving. You're a danger. You should not be driving. Mom, I love you. I'm not driving. I'm fine. You're not driving. You're a danger. You should not be driving. Mom, I love you. I'm not driving. I'm fine. You're not driving. You're a danger. You should not be driving. I expressed my desire to change my appearance, and my mother, noticing my embarrassment, asked me if I had ever experienced similar situations. I told her that I had, and she asked me if I had had any experience with girls. I replied that I had, and she asked me to elaborate, but I tried to distance myself from her. She, however, did not allow me to do so. I told her that I had been losing my head lately, and that I felt good with my new friend, who turned out to be a scoundrel. He was just using me, thinking I was his thing. I am very ashamed that I brought him to. Mom continued, I've had similar experiences. Have you had any experience with girls? Of course, I replied, trying to distance myself from my mother, but she stopped me, not allowing me to take a step back. I've been losing my head lately. I felt good with my new friend, who turned out to be just a scoundrel. He was just using me, thinking I was his thing. I am very ashamed that I brought him to our apartment. It's just that, as a woman, I really miss a man. Do you understand what I'm talking about? I nodded at my mom, not understanding her train of thought. You've been acting like a real man all this time. You weren't rude to me. You broke your fists protecting me. You tolerated my drunken antics. I'm very grateful to you, son, and I would like to thank you now. As a woman, can you do what Dad did? I couldn't believe my ears. My mother's words were quite clear to me. I wanted to tell her not to thank me, but I couldn't formulate a coherent response. We went into the bedroom and had sex. Thank you, son, for having you. I will never do anything you don't like again. I promise I won't touch alcohol at all, except on holidays. I don't mind a reasonable amount. I replied with a smile, suggesting that we both forget everything that had happened recently in our lives and start all over. My mother's words became clear to me. I wanted to tell her not to thank me, but I couldn't think straight. We went into the bedroom and had sex. Thank you, son. I will never do anything you don't like again. I promise I won't drink alcohol at all, except on holidays. I smiled and replied, let's forget everything that happened recently and start over. Once more, I looked into my mother's eyes. I nodded in response, agreeing with her words. Son, please bring me a towel. I opened the closet and took a towel from my mother's shelf, taking my own along with it. When I got to the bathroom, the door was open. Mom was standing on the mat, waiting for me. When I came out of the bathroom and went into the room, my mother was sitting on the couch in a bathrobe. I'll have to go in my old. Once more, I found myself gazing into my mother's eyes, and I nodded in agreement with her words. Mom, please bring me a towel. I opened the closet and retrieved a towel from my mother's shelf, taking my own along with it. Upon arriving at the bathroom, I found the door open. My mother was standing on the mat, waiting for me. When I exited the bathroom and entered the room, she was sitting on the couch in a bathrobe. I'll have to go in my old underwear tomorrow anyway and let this one be a keepsake. I'll buy you a new one. I definitely won't make a mistake in the size. How caring you are, she said, smiling as she got up from the couch. After all these events, my mother and I lived as friends. We could discuss with her some of the topics that appeared in our lives. Mom continued to consult with me about the choice of her outfits, which she bought for herself. I often asked my mother for advice when I went on a date with another girl. There were times when she forgot her towel, and I brought it to her in the bathroom. Our views have always been aligned, but neither of us felt much excitement. Time passed, and my mother moved back into her bedroom. We have installed beautiful new wallpaper there, and she ordered gorgeous curtains. My studies at the college were coming to an end, and my mother was well received in the new team. Mom offered advice when I went on a date with another girl. There were times when she forgot her towel, and I brought it to her in the bathroom. Our views have always crossed at the same time, but neither of us felt much excitement. Time passed. Mom moved back into her bedroom. We have pasted beautiful new wallpaper there. Mom ordered gorgeous curtains. My studies at the college were coming to an end. Mom was well received in the new team. She always came home from work cheerful. One day, Mom came home with a bouquet of flowers. I knew perfectly well that Mom had a man again. One evening, my mother started a conversation with me. I would like to tell you something important, she began, her voice excited. It was obvious that Mom was very worried. I decided to help her cope with this excitement. Do you want to tell me that you have a loved one? I asked my mom. One day, I came home from work and found a bouquet of flowers on my mother's table. I knew that she had a new romantic interest. One evening, she initiated a conversation with me about something important. Her voice was excited, and it was clear that she was worried. I decided to help her cope with this excitement. Do you want to tell me that you have a loved one? I asked her directly. Yes, how did you guess? She replied, blushing. Well, it wasn't difficult at all. I realized this as soon as bouquets of flowers began to appear in our apartment. I smiled back. Mom relaxed a little, and the blush on her cheeks had subsided. Sighing with relief, she asked, do you like it? What do you think about this? First of all, I want you to be happy, I replied. I'm very happy for you. Mom, how did you guess? Well, it wasn't difficult at all. I realized it as soon as the flowers began to appear in our apartment. I smiled back. Mom relaxed a little, the blush on her cheeks had subsided. Sighing with relief, she asked, do you like it? What do you think about this? I replied, I'm very happy for you. You are a very beautiful woman who must have a man she loves. He's a few years older than me. We've been dating for 6 months now, having given away all her secrets at once. My mother looked at me with joyful eyes, realizing that I supported her. I have news for you, too, Mom. I was handed a summons to the army. Mom's face immediately changed. It seemed that tears were about to flow from. You are a very attractive woman who must have a man she loves. Hek is a few years older than me. We've been dating for 6 months, during which time she's shared everything with me. My mother looked at me with joyful eyes, realizing that I supported her. I have news for you, too, Mom. I was handed a summons to the army. My mother's face immediately changed, it seemed that tears were about to flow from her eyes. After all, tears could not be avoided. Stop crying, Mom. There's nothing special about it. All the guys serve in the army, and I am no exception. Right now, you just need to take a closer look at a new person. Everything that happens is for the best. I began to reassure my mother. Can we come to the recruiting station together, son, to see you off? Mom asked, looking me straight in the eye with her tear-stained eyes. Her tears could not be helped. Mom, there's nothing special about it. All the guys serve in the army, and I am no exception. You just need to take a closer look at a new person. Everything that happens is for the best. I began to reassure my mother. Mom, can we come to the recruiting station together, son, to see you off? Mom, we'll get to know each other at the same time. After this conversation, time seemed to accelerate its course imperceptibly. The day came when I stood in the ranks of recruits at the recruiting station. I was anxiously waiting for my mother to appear. She squeezed out of the crowd of Murs, holding a tall, respectable man by the arm. I immediately liked this man outwardly. When they got close, Mom introduced us. He held out his hand too. We will have the opportunity to become acquainted at the same time. After this conversation, time seemed to accelerate its course imperceptibly. The day came when I stood in the ranks of recruits at the recruiting station. I was anxiously waiting for my mother to appear. She emerged from the crowd of Murs, holding a tall, respectable man by the arm. I immediately liked this man outwardly. When they got close, Mom introduced us. He held out his hand to me. It was a pleasure to meet you, young man. I wish you an easy service and a speedy return. Thanks. It was nice to see you too. Now I am sure that Mom is in good hands. Don't worry, son. We're fine. A command was given to the recruits to leave the place of construction. Mom started crying. They were moving away from me. Looking after them, I wanted to believe that everything would be fine with them, that Mom had finally found her happiness.